Today's a great victory. It's a great victory for Sean Combs. It's a great victory for the jury system. You saw that the Southern District of New York prosecutors came at him with all that they had. They're not stopping, but one thing stands between all of us and a prison, and that is a jury of 12 citizens.
Diddy may have been acquitted of some pretty big charges at his criminal trial, but he still was convicted of 2. So what's next for him in terms of sentencing, his finances, facing a wave of lawsuits, including a brand new one from a former exotic dancer who claims Diddy drugged and assaulted him, caused him to lose teeth and have to get gastric surgery?
Diddy breaks down. Right there, in the courtroom. No more denials, no more disruptions, no more glossing it up. The judge revealed a years-long sentence so shocking, so final, that the entire room froze. This wasn't just a ruling. This was a reckoning. A devastating verdict delivered with surgical precision.
And the sex trafficking charges that he was facing. He was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution. Currently, sentencing is set for October 3rd. However, there is a hearing set for July 8th, where the defense will be arguing for the sentencing date to be expedited, to happen sooner. Obviously, they want that, considering Combs was also denied bail yet again, despite arguments from his legal counsel after the verdict that he should be released on bond. It didn't happen. They want to make sure this happens as quickly as possible. But what will he be sentenced to, really? That's the question. And also, will the government seize his assets? What about all of those civil lawsuits that he faces? Again, a lot of questions, a lot to get into. So for all of this, let me bring on former sex crimes prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, the great Matt Murphy is with us. Matt, good to see you.
Happy to be here, as always.
Got to ask you your reaction to the verdict. Is it what you expected?
Well, hearkening back to, I don't know, we were talking about this, you and I, a couple of months ago, and I got to say, whether it's fun to be right or not in a case like this, we were both right. This was never a good fit for RICO for a lot of different reasons. And the consent element regarding the sex trafficking was always problematic. And I thought the prosecution here did a good job presenting their case. They did a good job presenting their theory. But when you match in a trial context, when you match like professorial and kind of plotting, which is the way a lot of government lawyers are, versus dynamic and engaging and that personality of the defense, it's always a mismatch. You're always up against it. And the Mann Act, like we talked about, I thought he was going down on that after like the second day of testimony. The problem is for the prosecution, the Mann Act is a very old law, and it was essentially legislative morality from about 100 years ago, where it was transporting prostitutes across state lines. The intent may have been good. It was essentially a very early version of sex trafficking, but it was really more an attempt to stop prostitution, which is, as we know, never going to happen. So almost every lonely guy in New York City who's going through a divorce, who is having a problem in a dating pool, who has some sex worker drive over from New Jersey, if he buys her Uber or his Uber, theoretically, that's a violation of the Mann Act. So that is it's not the same type of crime. There's no mandatory minimum under federal law. The judge does not have to. That. Right. They don't have to. Now, it carries up to 10 years per event. So he faces up to 20 years. The prosecution, I think, is asking for 46 months or something like that. They're asking for far less than that.
If they had called, let's say, Christina Courtroom, okay, this chief of staff who had been mentioned, I think, by almost every witness, and she said, hey, listen, there was a criminal enterprise, okay? We were all a part of it. Everybody knew what the job description was. My job was to do this. His job was to do this. You think they would have gotten racketeering? If they didn't include Jane, who was arguably the more problematic testimony, I mean, Sean Combs still paying her rent, messages that she was setting up a lot of these sexual encounters. Cassie had messages too that were problematic that showed, if we're talking about whether she was a willing participant or not, but if you focus just on Cassie and you didn't call in Jane, or you didn't call in a Mia, or you didn't call in a Brianna Bengolan, if you limited the case, and now it's so easy to play, Monday morning quarterback or armchair lawyer here, But do you feel that the prosecution could have won this case if they structured it differently, if they called different witnesses?
That's a great question, and that's something that these prosecutors will literally be wondering for the rest of their lives, for the rest of their careers. They're going to be wondering if they'd done it differently, would the impact upon the jury and would the result have been different. The fundamental problem.
And Diddy, once untouchable, collapsed under its weight. The atmosphere was electric from the moment court session began. You could feel the tension like static in the air. Reporters packed the press gallery. Supporters and critics alike watched in silence, waiting for the outcome of a trial that has consumed headlines for months. There was no prepared narrative to soften the blow, no advance warning for what was coming. The verdict was guilty. And now, the sentence. When the judge spoke, he didn't hesitate. He read the numbers, year after year, count after count. The sentence was longer than anyone expected, far harsher than any of the pundits forecast. And as the list of years built, something broke. Diddy didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. His reaction was all in the fall. A head bowed, shoulders caved in, face buried in hands.
I think, is that this was kind of always a round peg in a square hole. The arson, that domestic violence video that we all watched, that's horrific. All of that should have been prosecuted as state crimes in Los Angeles. That as a fundamental, starting point.
Well, they couldn't
So
do it now. It
basically,
was time barred.
No, of course, the statute is run on everything.
Yep.
But that would have been, he would have been prosecuted for exactly what he did instead of predicate acts into a RICO theory. Now, RICO, as we know, was designed for essentially mafia organization, for organized crime. And the idea is simply because there's a legitimate business, like in The Godfather, they had a legitimate olive oil importing business, and that was but it was still a criminal enterprise. The real thing was the mafia. The real thing was the organized crime surrounding the Corleone family, to use an example that everybody can probably relate to. So simply because their olive oil importing business was legitimate, that's not a defense to a RICO thing. That's the current state of the law. What they did here is they took a business that was always legitimate, Bad Boy Records, that was always and the purpose is to make music and make money. Everything surrounded that. And the defense argument, which they obviously argued very effectively, was that is not a criminal enterprise. So the very first element of RICO has always been problematic from the very beginning. You and I talked about that 2 months ago when this whole thing started. And and the jury, this was a sober jury that the questions were serious and direct. And, they sent that note out regarding juror 25 right at the very beginning saying, hey, this guy's not deliberating. And so this was a serious group. And the Mann Act, they did convict on that. So they were, by the fact that that it was unanimous, meant that they were getting along. Federal juries tend to be, in California anyway, we have, they draw our state juries off the DMV database. That's how you get jury duty, is from the DMV. Federally, it's based on voter rules. So it's people who are conscientious enough to actually vote. And you tend to get a more serious class of juror in federal court, which I think is interesting. So to answer your question, it's something that we could kick around for years.
Sure.
But I think the fundamental problem here is that it was always kind of a misfit for a RICO theory. Just like the sex trafficking, sex trafficking requires fraud, force, or coercion, right? So that essentially is the same elements of rape. So you essentially, it's transporting somebody under circumstances that equate to rape. Is something forceful, something fearful. That it just doesn't fit very well here, especially when you're talking about all these people they're orbiting him. They're all trying to advance their own career. And when the defense attorney got up and said, Cassie got $30 million as a result of her settlement, right? And that was a big move.
Yeah, I wasn't sold for that personally, because I was like, the prosecution came back and be like, she already settled. What's her incentive to come here and lie? You know, what's her incentive to be a part of this? And that for me, but I think the messages, the conduct that arguably contradicts someone being a victim, and I know there's complicated factors between an abuser and a victim, the trauma, I get it. I totally understand it, but I wonder if that's what saddled the jury. Okay, I want to move past the verdict because now we have to talk about what's happening next. First thing, when the sentencing hearing is going to happen. So they have this hearing next week about whether to expedite the sentencing, happening before October 3rd. If both sides agree, great. If they don't, what is a compelling legal argument for the defense to say, we want this sentencing to happen much sooner?
Well, I mean, we know that behind the scenes, what they want, of course, is
Tears starting to slip through sorrow and shock. The man who commanded stages and boardrooms now forced into silence. This wasn't just about prison time. This was about everything he represented. A cultural icon built on power, fame, empire, now reduced to a single moment of public collapse. And it happened faster than he or anyone could process. Witnesses in the gallery said the room went eerily quiet. No whisper, no shuffle, not even pens scribbling notes. Everyone internalized what just happened. The judge didn't issue a rehearing. He didn't tiptoe around. He didn't express pity. He just spoke it, painfully, plainly, and ended it. This is your punishment. This is your consequence. No one, not prosecutors, not defense, not media, had predicted anything like it. Legal experts watching the case called it unprecedented. The high-profile nature of the defendant made many expect a sentence influenced by influence. Instead, the judge sent a message.
So when the jury came back not guilty on count 1, 2, and 4, I was a little surprised, especially to count 2, but, I do respect the jury's decision. They spent a lot of time listening to this case, listening to all the testimony, listening to all the evidence, and that was the verdict that they had rendered.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised that they found him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. We have been saying since for weeks on this show that felt like a straightforward path to conviction. Wasn't surprised not guilty with Jane, given some of the gray areas of her testimony, but also the jury didn't even ask for one readback of her testimony or anything to do with her testimony, so it made me think they might have already been decided there. I was surprised about Cassie Ventura sex trafficking just because, like you said, the readback of that testimony, and then shortly thereafter, they came back yesterday and said, we have a verdict on that charge. So I thought, they're convinced. And when it came to racketeering, I thought they were still going to be hung because they said they were at an impasse yesterday. It seemed like based on their note, there was no way that would change. The judge told them to continue deliberating. They come back today, and like in an hour, they come back not guilty on racketeering. I'm not really sure what that split ultimately will be. Maybe the jurors will speak out and we'll hear. Got to ask you about Diddy's reaction. Okay, so we have courtroom sketches of what it looked like. You were in there. What was his reaction to the verdict?
Oh, he was very pleased with the verdict. Obviously, I think for the defense and the defendant, that being Sean Combs, I think obviously they would have wanted an acquittal on all the charges. But I think given that they weren't a conviction on the more serious charges of RICO conspiracy and sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie in one charge and Jane in another charge, I think overall Combs was very, very pleased with the jury, to the point where I saw him kind of mouth a little thank you to the jurors as they were still sitting kind of in the jury box, as they were kind of leaving for the end of their day. Obviously, we still have some more matters to address for our end. But in terms of just his reaction, even his family's reaction, Jesse, I think they were so happy knowing that there's such a strong possibility that their father will come home. Obviously, if he would have been convicted on the more serious charges, that might have been a different discussion. But given that he was only convicted on count 3 and 5, that being the Mann Act, it seems like given that it comes with a lesser penalty and sentencing, I think the family is like, yes, our father is coming home, our loved one is coming home, and we hope to see him very, very soon.
And talk about a reaction. Outside that courthouse, my gosh, what has been going on out there? There's verbal disputes, people spraying things. What is, just give us a brief summary of what you've witnessed outside that courthouse after the verdict.
I've witnessed a lot, Jesse. A lot was going on. There was kind of, I will even say, pandemonium after the verdict was read. And outside, a lot of Diddy supporters, a lot of people who are kind of with the Free Diddy, I wouldn't say movement, but I guess, they believed in his innocence. They were very pleased, even thinking that it was a possibility he'd just walk outside of that courthouse at some point. But it was a lot of commotion. I did see some people getting to some heated debates, especially in relation to Cassie. I saw some people getting very upset because they believed that the government was trying to take a good man down who did a lot for the culture. Those types of conversations were being had from a lot of people in the public. I even saw some kind of weirder things, and that being people squirting baby oil on themselves. And one of the reporters even got some on her shirt by one of the people who were kind of over in that area. And so a lot was going on, to the point that I think the courthouse police were just kind of like, okay, we need everybody to calm down. They have barricades going all the way down the street. I think in the event that Sean Combs would have walked out of that courthouse, it would have just been straight chaos, I think, outside. But for the most part, especially with that not happening around that time frame, that a lot of people, especially his supporters, were very pleased. And obviously for some, they were a little disappointed with the verdict. But for most that we could see here at the courthouse, a lot.
Fame is no shelter. When the gavel finally came down, it echoed louder than any earshot. That strike announced not just the end of a trial, it marked the end of an illusion. Diddy's breakdown was real. He wasn't just reacting to guilty verdicts or technicalities. He was reacting to the irreversible loss of everything he'd built. His brand, his freedom, his future. Gone in a single, unyielding sentence. Outside the courtroom, chaos erupted. News vans deployed live cameras. Reporters shouted into microphones. Social media exploded. Fans and detractors clashed in comments, hashtags, live streams. But none of it could soften the reality inside. Diddy was sentenced to years behind bars. No bail, no leniency. Just the slow, unforgiving countdown of prison time. At his table, lawyers sat stunned. No one said anything, because nothing more could be said. The case they fought for dissolved under the weight of the sentence. The man they defended dissolved too. No press releases, no statements, just defeat etched in silence. The courtroom sketches captured it. Shoulders sagged, head bowed, tears glinting on cheeks. No bravado, no act, just raw consequence. The judge's words referenced the weight of months of scandal, leaked evidence, witness testimony, previous allegations. Not every scandal ended up in court, but the judge folded them all into the sentence. He pointed to patterns, escalating behavior, a culture enabled. Not just the crime, but the context. He said the sentence would echo beyond the defendant. It was about accountability, finality, cultural responsibility. That's why Diddy broke. Because the sentence wasn't just about him. It was about the ripple he made. And the judge declared, "Ripples no longer shield you." A powerful statement. But for Diddy, it was personal. He sat motionless. The tears glistened. Reports from people inside describe a guttural sobbing that came from nothing but helplessness. Others say he sat there, immobile, like his body no longer belonged to him. The man who built Bad Boy Records, who embodied media, music, fashion.
Justice, the DOJ, has usually only charged Mann Act violations when there's financial gain. And they even cite a number of cases in the Southern District of New York, where Combs was prosecuted, that apparently involved defendants that set up a prostitution business for profit. Again, trying to distinguish between Combs' conduct and these cases. He never did any of this for profit, they argued. And they even cite the 1953 U.S. Attorney's Manual that says, quote, "As a general rule, prosecution should not be instituted in the so-called non-commercial cases." And they claim the Department of Justice manual today, quote, "makes clear that the prosecution of customers involved in an 18 U.S.C. 2421 offense, like Mr. Combs here, is now limited to prosecuting those who engage in commercial sex with victims of sex trafficking, in addition to those who otherwise perpetrate or facilitate human trafficking offenses." And in the absence of any sex trafficking charge, however, it is clear that the standalone Mann Act counts never would have been prosecuted. That seems true. I think you ask any legal expert, they will say if all the government had against Sean Combs was the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, just the prostitution charges, they probably wouldn't have gone after him. They coupled it with racketeering and they coupled it with sex trafficking. I agree with that. I don't think that they would have gone after him just for that. Anyway, the defense highlights how modern day prosecutions of Johns is really when you're talking about exploiting vulnerable foreigners who don't speak English well, which again is not the case here. And they highlight how the only potentially comparable case in New York is where you had a retired police officer and a former judge who apparently hired women to have sex with a male fraternal group called the Jesters. But Combs' attorneys say, while there was no profit there, there's no profit here, there was sex trafficking of those prostitutes. That's what's different. Again, Combs was acquitted of sex trafficking in this case. And here's the main point, quote, moreover, the cases which involve defendants similarly situated to Mr. Combs have been released on bond pending sentencing. In reviewing the cases across the country where the primary or sole conviction was for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421, the defendants who were not charged with running a prostitution business have been released pending sentencing. And then Combs' attorneys make another argument for why Combs' conditions are exceptional. And it's about him being locked up at the MDC. They say that a district court judge in the Southern District in another case basically said how bad the MDC is. As Judge Furman noted, the state of affairs at MDC is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman
stripped down to one frightened figure. That moment, and Diddy's reaction, will loop in headlines, law seminars, music retrospectives. Because this wasn't a sentence. It was a collapse. It was the final chapter in a saga built over decades. Culture will remember the run, but history will mark the fall. In the hours following, the fallout was instant. Brands dropped ties. Streaming projects were suspended. Contracts were terminated. Board meetings called. Execs went radio silent. Everyone feared association. The empire crumbled from the outside in. And no one around him published statements. No damage control. No spin. It's clear now. The sentence wasn't about justice being served. It was about justice being made visible. And for Diddy, the visibility broke him. Analysts in legal circles call it a precedent, a pivot, a system refusing to grant exemptions to status. It sends a loud signal. Not even the biggest name or the biggest history gets equal treatment if the court sees pattern over power, even under extreme scrutiny. Because for years, celebrity plaintiffs, defendants, power players, many saw advantage in influence. But this ruling undid that illusion. Some say the sentence will be appealed. Probably. A long appeal could follow. But appeals take time. And this sentence? It started moving right when it was handed down. A walk to prison. Immediate processing. Chains, transfers. Court records are updating. Corrections facilities preparing. Life behind bars awaiting. Diddy's downfall wasn't just legal. It was cultural, emotional, structural. The sentence, the breakdown, the silence, they all happened in real time. No leaks, no warnings, just the slow collapse of everything built. The moment that legacy got stripped away, and the public saw it unfold live. Photos outside the hall, fan reactions, tweet storms, none of it can erase the core reality. Diddy got years. Diddy cried. Diddy was led away. No more headlines. Just time. This isn't over. Stories will continue. Appeals may come. But the sentence stands. The image of collapse stands. The cultural echo stands. He broke in court. And in doing that, he showed what control looks like when it's finally stripped. Stillness. Silence. Tears. Time counted out in years. That moment wasn't about sentence, it was about consequence. Not just for Diddy, For anyone watching, justice doesn't yield to fame. It digs under. It sends truth. And today, with that sentence revealed, Diddy and the world saw it.